Pregnant wife disappears after seeing lover in her bed, but leaves behind a USB stick. The late afternoon sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of their Boston penthouse, casting long shadows across the pristine hardwood floors. Evelyn Grace Hartley stepped out of the elevator, her honey-colored eyes tired from a long day at work. She hadn't planned on coming home early, but a canceled meeting had given her an unexpected reprieve. Her cashmere sweater felt soft against her skin as she quietly placed her designer bag on the marble counter, another gift from Grant, who insisted his wife should always look the part of a successful architect's spouse. Something felt off. The air held an unfamiliar tension, like the atmosphere before a storm. A man's dress shoe lay carelessly tossed near the hallway. Grant was usually meticulous about their placement in the closet. Her thumb instinctively brushed against her fingertips, a nervous habit she'd never managed to break. Then she heard it, a muffled laugh from their bedroom, distinctly feminine, followed by the low rumble of Grant's voice. The sound pierced through her chest like an icy blade. Evelyn's feet moved of their own accord, carrying her down the hallway. Each step felt like walking through deep water, her body moving in slow motion while her mind raced ahead. The bedroom door stood slightly ajar, early evening light spilling through the crack. She didn't slam the door open, didn't scream, didn't make a scene. Instead, she stood there, taking in the sight of her husband of 7 years, entangled with another woman in their bed, the same bed where they'd planned their future, where they'd whispered dreams of the family they'd build together. Grant noticed her first. His blue eyes widened, that practiced charm instantly morphing into panic. He reached for his expensive watch, a telltale gesture she'd seen countless times when he'd lied about working late. "Evelyn, I can explain." She turned away before he could finish, her movements precise and controlled. The hardwood floors creaked beneath her feet as she walked to their shared home office. With steady hands, she retrieved her journal from the bottom drawer of her desk and the small USB drive she'd hidden behind it years ago, a digital archive of financial records, recorded conversations, and documents that had made her uncomfortable enough to save but too afraid to confront. From their bedroom came the sounds of hurried movement, clothes being gathered, Grant's voice growing more insistent. "Evelyn, wait. Let's talk about this." She grabbed her backup laptop bag from under her desk, stuffed in a few essentials from her drawer, and walked out. No dramatic exit, no tears. Not yet. The weight of the USB drive in her pocket anchored her to reality as the elevator doors closed on Grant's approaching figure. In the lobby, Donald, the elderly doorman who'd watched her walk through these doors countless times with a smile, took one look at her face and wordlessly hailed a taxi. His weathered hand squeezed her shoulder gently as she passed. It wasn't until the taxi turned the corner, leaving behind the gleaming glass tower she'd called home, that Evelyn allowed her hand to rest on her still flat stomach. She was 4 weeks pregnant, a secret she'd planned to share with Grant over a romantic dinner that weekend. The taxi driver glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "Where to, ma'am?" Evelyn closed her eyes, her thumb brushing against her fingertips one last time. When she opened them, there was steel in her honey-colored gaze. "South Station, please." As Boston's skyline receded behind her, Evelyn pulled out her journal, her constant companion through 7 years of marriage. Its pages held the story of a love she thought would last forever, now ending not with a bang, but with quiet dignity. She opened to a fresh page and wrote a single line. "Today, I choose myself." The tears would come later, in the quiet darkness of a train headed south. But for now, she held on to the strange calm that comes with absolute clarity. She had no idea where she would end up, but she knew with certainty what she was leaving behind. A beautiful cage made of glass and lies, where she'd slowly been losing herself piece by piece. Her phone buzzed repeatedly in her bag, Grant's name flashing on the screen. She turned it off without reading his messages. Some bridges, once crossed, can never bear weight again. The Greyhound bus rumbled to a stop in Fairhope, Alabama, as dawn painted the sky in gentle strokes of pink and gold. Evelyn stepped onto the sidewalk, her laptop bag slung over one shoulder and exhaustion weighing heavy in her bones. After 3 days of traveling south, changing buses at random stations to ensure she couldn't be followed, she finally allowed herself to breathe. The coastal town sprawled before her, a picturesque collection of old buildings and spreading oaks draped in Spanish moss. Early morning light glinted off the waters of Mobile Bay in the distance, promising something she desperately needed: peace. Her first stop was a small diner where the waitress, upon seeing her worn appearance, brought her a second cup of coffee without being asked. Evelyn pulled out her phone, powered it on for the first time since Boston Puai, and winced at the flood of notifications. 37 missed calls from Grant, 15 voicemails, 63 text messages. She deleted them all without reading, then searched for local rentals. An hour and 3 dead ends later, she stood outside Riley's flower shop, studying the "Room for Rent" sign in the window. The building was a charming 2-story structure with weathered blue paint and white trim. Flower displays spilled from wooden barrels onto the sidewalk, their sweet fragrance mingling with the salt air. The bell above the door chimed as Evelyn stepped inside. The shop was a riot of colors and scents, with bouquets arranged in vintage containers and potted plants occupying every available surface. Behind the counter, a small woman with silver hair tied back in a floral scarf looked up from a massive arrangement of hydrangeas. "We're not open for another 20 minutes, she said, her voice carrying a no-nonsense edge that reminded Evelyn of her grandmother. "I'm here about the room," Evelyn replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. "The sign in the window?" The woman, who had to be in her late 60s, stepped around the counter, studying Evelyn with sharp blue eyes. She wore a floral dress that had seen better days and mud-stained boots that spoke of real work. "I'm June Riley. The room's upstairs. Separate entrance from the back. $600 a month. Utilities included. No pets, no parties, no drama." Evelyn's thumb brushed against her fingertips. "I can pay 3 months in advance," she said, thinking of the emergency cash she'd withdrawn before leaving Boston. "And I can help in the shop if you need it." June's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "You're running from something." It wasn't a question, but Evelyn answered anyway. "Someone, but not the law," she added quickly. I just need—" She trailed off, unsure how to explain that she needed more than just a room. She needed a place where Grant's influence couldn't reach. June walked to the door and flipped the sign to "Open." "Come on," she said, heading toward a narrow staircase at the back of the shop. "Let's see if this room suits you." The space was small, but clean, with a bed, dresser, and a tiny kitchenette. A bay window overlooked the back garden, where wooden workbenches and potting supplies clustered beneath an ancient oak tree. Something about the simplicity of it all made Evelyn's throat tight. "Bathroom's through there," June pointed. "Shared with my son Mason when he's working late in his workshop out back. He's quiet, keeps to himself." She turned to face Evelyn fully. "I don't need your story, girl, but I need to know, are you in real trouble?" Evelyn met her gaze. "No, I'm just—" Her hand drifted to her stomach unconsciously. "I'm just trying to start over." June's eyes caught the gesture, and understanding flickered across her weathered features. She nodded once, decisively. "Rent's due on the 1st. Shop opens at 7, closes at 6. If you're serious about helping, we'll work something out." She headed for the stairs, then paused. "And we'll need to get you some proper work clothes. Those fancy jeans won't last a day in the garden." After June left, Evelyn sat on the bed, letting her fingers trail over the simple patchwork quilt. Outside, a wind chime tinkled softly, and somewhere below, she could hear June talking to her flowers as she worked. For the first time since leaving Boston, she felt the hard knot in her chest begin to loosen. She pulled out her journal and wrote, "Maybe sometimes you have to let everything fall apart to see who you really are beneath the pieces." Dawn broke over Fairhope with the sound of someone whistling an old Sinatra tune. Evelyn woke to the gentle melody drifting through her open window, accompanied by the rhythmic sound of tools against wood. Her first week in the flower shop had taught her this was Mason's morning ritual, early work in his workshop before the heat of the day set in. She dressed in her new, proper work clothes, denim overalls June had insisted on buying, a soft cotton t-shirt, and sturdy boots that still felt foreign on her feet. Her reflection in the small mirror above the dresser showed someone she barely recognized. Gone were the designer clothes and carefully styled hair. Instead, she pulled her dark waves into a messy bun, wondering if this simpler version of herself had been hiding underneath all along. The morning sickness hit as she descended the back stairs, forcing her to grip the railing until the wave passed. At 6 weeks pregnant, her secret was still safe, though June's knowing glances suggested the older woman had figured it out. The smell of flowers that once delighted her now occasionally made her stomach turn, an ironic twist given her new workplace. "Morning," a quiet voice called as she stepped into the garden. Mason Riley stood at his workbench, surrounded by pieces of what looked like an old display cabinet. He was tall and lean, with sawdust coating his gray t-shirt and work jeans. His green-gray eyes met hers briefly before returning to his work. She'd noticed he rarely held eye contact for long. "Good morning," she replied, heading toward the shop's back entrance. "That's the way you look tonight, isn't it? What you were whistling." A slight smile tugged at his lips as he nodded, focused on measuring a piece of wood. Dad's favorite. Used to play it every Sunday morning. His voice carried a hint of something complicated when he mentioned his father, but he didn't elaborate. Inside the shop, June was already arranging flowers for the day's orders. "There you are," she said, not looking up from a bouquet of lilies. "Delivery van's broken down. Mason's fixing it. But we've got 3 arrangements that need to go out this morning. I can take them," Evelyn offered, then hesitated, "though I don't know my way around town yet." "Mason," June called out, "come show Evelyn the delivery routes before you get lost in that cabinet." Her son appeared in the doorway, wiping his hands on a rag. "Now? Unless you want me sending her to Mobile by accident," June replied dryly. The next hour passed with Mason driving Evelyn around Fairhope in his old pickup truck, pointing out landmarks and shortcuts. He was surprisingly knowledgeable about the town's history, though he shared it in brief, quiet sentences rather than long explanations. When they passed the local clinic, he mentioned almost casually, "Good doctors there. My mom swears by Dr. Anderson." His eyes flickered to her midsection so quickly she almost missed it. Back at the shop, Evelyn loaded the arrangements into her car, a used Honda she'd bought with cash from a local dealer, determined to leave no paper trail. As she secured the last vase, Mason approached with a small paper bag. "Ginger candies," he explained, setting the bag on her passenger seat. "Mom used to swear by them well, they help with nausea." He turned and walked back to his workshop before she could respond, the tips of his ears slightly red. The deliveries took her through neighborhoods of historic homes with sweeping porches and gardens bursting with azaleas. At her last stop, an elderly woman insisted on showing her entire photo album of her prize-winning roses. Evelyn listened politely, fighting back tears when the woman's kindness reminded her of quiet Sunday afternoons with her own grandmother. Returning to the shop, she found June teaching a flower-arranging class to a group of local women. The sight of their happy chatter made her throat tight. In Boston, she'd attended charity galas and cocktail parties, but there had been nothing genuine about those forced smiles and air kisses. She slipped past them to the back garden, where Mason was still working on the cabinet. The steady rhythm of his tools and distant whistle provided an odd comfort as she began organizing the delivery receipts. A breeze carried the scent of jasmine from June's prized vine, and for a moment, the nausea subsided. That evening, she wrote in her journal, "There's something beautiful about places where people don't expect you to be anything but who you are. Maybe that's what healing looks like. Learning to grow in new soil, even when your roots are still tender." 3 weeks into her new life, Evelyn was arranging sunflowers when she saw him, a man in an expensive suit, so out of place on Fairhope's casual streets that he might as well have been wearing a neon sign. He wasn't Grant. This man was shorter, darker, but she recognized the type. A private investigator, most likely, hired to track her down. Her hands trembled slightly as she positioned the last flower, her thumb brushing against her fingertips. The man passed the shop window slowly, his eyes scanning the interior with practiced casualness. June, who had been pricing potted orchids nearby, moved to stand beside Evelyn, effectively blocking her from view. "Friend of yours?" June asked quietly, her voice carrying an edge of steel. "Not exactly." Evelyn's voice was barely a whisper. At nearly 10 weeks pregnant, her slight bump was hidden by her work apron, but her heart raced thinking about what Grant would do when he discovered her condition. June's weathered hands continued working with the orchids. "Mason," she called out, her voice steady, "would you help Evelyn take these arrangements to the cooler in the back?" Mason appeared from his workshop, reading the tension in the room instantly. Without a word, he gathered an armful of arrangements and guided Evelyn toward the back room. As they passed through the storage area, Evelyn caught a glimpse of the man through the side window, now speaking into his phone. "You're safe here," Mason said quietly, setting down the flowers. It was the most direct thing he'd ever said to her. His gray-green eyes met hers fully for once, carrying a promise of protection that made her throat tight. Later that afternoon, June closed the shop early, something Evelyn had never seen her do before. "Family meeting," she announced, leading them to her small apartment above the shop's main floor. The space was cozy and lived in, with mismatched furniture and walls covered in old photographs. "Time you told us what we're dealing with," June said, setting 3 mugs of tea on the coffee table. "Not everything," she added, seeing Evelyn's panicked expression. "Just what we need to know to help." Evelyn wrapped her hands around the warm mug, breathing in the calming scent of chamomile. "My husband, ex-husband, he's a controlling man, wealthy, connected. I left him when I found out he was unfaithful, but it's more complicated than that." She paused, gathering her courage. "I'm carrying his child, and I have evidence of his financial misconduct, things that could damage his reputation, his career." Mason, who had been leaning against the doorframe, straightened. "He's looking for both you and the evidence." Evelyn nodded. "The investigator today, he won't be the last. Grant doesn't handle losing control well. Of anything." June set her mug down with a decisive clink. "Well, he's lost control of this one. Mason, we're implementing the Henderson Protocol." Mason nodded, a hint of a smile touching his lips. Evelyn looked between them, confused. "Mrs. Henderson was a friend who needed to disappear from an abusive husband back in '82, June explained. "We learned a few tricks then. First, you'll move into the apartment behind my kitchen. No one knows about it. It was my mother's sewing room. The room upstairs becomes storage as far as anyone knows." "I can't impose," Evelyn started, but June waved her objection away. "Second," she continued, "you'll need a different look when you go into town. Nothing dramatic, just enough to confuse casual observers. And Mason will drive you to your doctor's appointments in Mobile. Harder to track than local visits." Mason pushed off from the doorframe. "I'll reinforce the back entrance and install better locks tonight." That evening, as Mason worked on the security upgrades, Evelyn helped June move her belongings into the hidden apartment. The space was smaller than her rented room, but felt infinitely safer. June had already stocked the mini-fridge with ginger ale and crackers for her morning sickness. "Why are you both doing this for me?" Evelyn asked, organizing her few possessions in the tiny dresser. June paused in her task of hanging curtains. "Because 20 years ago someone did it for me, and because you remind me of myself back then, scared, but standing your ground anyway." She turned to face Evelyn fully. "People like your ex-husband, they take and take until you've got nothing left. But sometimes, finding your strength means finding your people first." Through the wall, they could hear Mason whistling as he worked, the sound mixing with the distant chime of June's garden bells. Evelyn pulled out her journal and wrote, "Maybe family isn't just what you're born into. Maybe it's also who stands beside you when the storm comes." The mid-August heat pressed against Fairhope like a heavy blanket, but the hidden apartment behind June's kitchen remained surprisingly cool. At 14 weeks pregnant, Evelyn sat cross-legged on her bed, staring at her laptop screen. The email from her former colleague in Boston made her blood run cold. "Grant's been asking questions, claiming you're unstable, that you took sensitive documents. Be careful." A knock at her door made her jump. "Delivery run," Mason's quiet voice called. She quickly closed the laptop and opened the door to find him holding 2 paper cups of fresh mint lemonade. Her latest pregnancy craving. "Your mom said you're teaching me the wedding arrangements today." She accepted the drink gratefully, noting how he'd added extra mint leaves, just the way she liked it. "Anderson, wedding. They want wildflowers in mason jars." He smiled slightly at the irony of his name. "Thought you might want to learn somewhere quiet." They headed to his workshop, where he'd cleared a large workbench. Fresh-cut flowers filled metal buckets, black-eyed Susans, purple coneflowers, Queen Anne's lace. The morning sun filtered through the windows, catching dust motes and the lingering wood shavings from his earlier projects. "Mom says you've got good hands for this," Mason commented, demonstrating how to strip the lower leaves from a stem. "Says you feel the flowers, don't just arrange them." Evelyn watched his hands work, strong and careful at the same time. "It's peaceful. In Boston, everything was about appearance, perfection. Here," she picked up a slightly crooked sunflower. "Here, the imperfections make things beautiful." They worked in comfortable silence, broken only by soft instructions and the distant sound of June talking to customers in the shop. Mason showed her how to create a loose, natural arrangement, his hands occasionally guiding hers to adjust a stem or angle. "My father hated flowers," he said suddenly, focusing intently on a stubborn piece of twine. "Said they were a waste of time and money. Called the shop mom's silly little hobby, even though it put me through college." Evelyn's hands stilled. Is that why you stayed? To help your mom? Partly. He met her eyes briefly. Also because here, I can build things, fix things, make something beautiful out of raw materials. In the corporate world, he shrugged. Too many people like your ex-husband. The mention of Grant made her thumb brush against her fingertips. Mason noticed. He can't reach you here, he said firmly. We've got cameras installed, security lights. Mom's got half the town watching for strangers, and he trailed off, color rising in his neck. And you? She prompted softly. I'm here, whatever you need. The simple sincerity in his voice made her eyes sting. Before she could respond, June's urgent voice carried from the shop. Mason, get in here. They hurried inside to find June at the computer, her face tight with concern. That Boston law firm's been calling local businesses, asking about new residents. They're getting closer. Evelyn's hands went protectively to her growing bump. I should leave. I'm putting you all at risk. No, Mason and June said simultaneously. June turned from the computer. Running's exactly what he wants. Makes you look unstable, like he's been telling people. She eyed the USB drive Evelyn wore on a chain around her neck. Time to stop hiding and start fighting. I know a good lawyer in Mobile, Mason added. Rebecca Martinez. Specializes in cases like yours. Let me make a call. That evening, after the shop closed, Mason found Evelyn in the garden, writing in her journal. Without a word, he sat beside her on the old wooden bench, their shoulders barely touching. Above them, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. What are you writing? He asked softly. She looked at the page, at the words she'd just written. There's a difference between running away and moving forward. Running is what you do when you're afraid. Moving forward is what you do when you're brave enough to imagine a different life. About being brave, she answered, closing the journal. In the growing darkness, she could feel the solid warmth of his presence, steady as a heartbeat. A firefly landed on the bench between them, its light pulsing gently. Mason's hand found hers in the darkness, calloused fingers intertwining with her own. They sat there until June called them in for dinner, neither needing to fill the silence with words. Sometimes, Evelyn realized, strength comes not in grand gestures, but in small moments of quiet trust. The law office of Rebecca Martinez occupied the second floor of a restored Victorian house in downtown Mobile. Mason's truck pulled into the parking lot exactly 10 minutes early for the appointment. He'd insisted on driving Evelyn himself, though June had argued she could handle it. You don't have to come in, Evelyn said, her thumb brushing her fingertips as she stared at the building's elaborate woodwork. Mason turned off the engine. I know. He stayed in his seat, waiting. At 16 weeks pregnant, Evelyn's bump was becoming more noticeable, even under the loose cotton dress June had helped her choose for the meeting. She touched the USB drive hanging from its chain, drawing strength from its weight. Inside, Rebecca Martinez's office smelled of coffee and old books. The lawyer herself was a striking woman in her early 50s, with sharp eyes and silver streaks in her dark hair. She rose from behind her desk as Mason and Evelyn entered. You must be Evelyn, she said, extending her hand. And Mason Riley. How's your mother's garden doing? Thriving, Mason replied. Thanks for seeing us on short notice. Rebecca gestured for them to sit. Mason rarely asks for favors. When he called, I knew it was important. Her gaze settled on Evelyn. Tell me everything, starting with what's on that drive around your neck. For the next hour, Evelyn laid out her story. The years of Grant's subtle manipulation, the discovery of his affair, the financial documents she'd gathered showing how he'd been siphoning money from their joint accounts into offshore holdings, the recordings of his gaslighting conversations, saved because something in her had known she'd need them one day. Rebecca took notes, occasionally asking for clarification. When Evelyn finished, the lawyer sat back, tapping her pen against her legal pad. He's been busy, she said finally. I've heard rumors about your husband's activities in Boston legal circles. He's filing for divorce, claiming abandonment, has private investigators searching 3 states. He's even tried to freeze your joint accounts, though I'm guessing you already moved your funds. Evelyn nodded. The day I left, I only took my portion, everything I could prove I'd earned or inherited. Smart girl. Rebecca smiled. He's also preparing to file for full custody once the baby is born, claiming you're mentally unstable and financially incapable of providing proper care. Mason's hand gripped the armrest of his chair. That's ridiculous. It's predictable, Rebecca corrected. Men like Grant McAllister don't lose gracefully. They try to destroy what they can't control. She turned back to Evelyn. But you've given me exactly what we need to fight back. Those financial records. They're not just evidence of his manipulation. They're proof of tax evasion and fraud. Evelyn's breath caught. I never wanted to ruin him. I just wanted to be free. Sometimes freedom comes at a price, Rebecca said gently. And sometimes that price should be paid by those who tried to cage you. She pulled out a fresh legal pad. Here's what we're going to do. First, we file a countersuit for divorce on grounds of adultery and emotional abuse. Then we use these financial records as leverage, not to ruin him, but to ensure he backs off completely. Will it work? Mason asked. Rebecca's smile turned sharp. Men like Grant care about two things: their money and their reputation. Threaten both, and they usually come to heel. She began writing rapidly. I'll need you to document everything from now on. Every call, every attempt at contact. And, Evelyn, you need to see a therapist. I'm not. Evelyn started to protest. Not because you need it, though trauma counseling wouldn't hurt, but because we need to establish that you're stable, responsible, and actively working to ensure your and your child's well-being. On the drive back to Fairhope, storm clouds gathered over Mobile Bay. Mason drove carefully, one hand steady on the wheel. Thank you, Evelyn said softly, for coming with me, for everything. He glanced at her. Rebecca's good. She'll help you fight this. That's not what I meant. She looked at his profile, strong and steady against the darkening sky. Thank you for showing me what real support feels like. That night, in her journal, Evelyn wrote, Strength isn't always about standing alone. Sometimes it's about letting others stand with you, knowing they're there not because they have to be, but because they choose to be. Outside her window, the first drops of rain began to fall, and in the distance, thunder rolled across the bay, nature's own declaration of war. The autumn air carried a hint of coolness as Evelyn arranged chrysanthemums in the shop window. At 20 weeks pregnant, her bump was now pronounced enough that June had taken to leaving comfortable chairs in strategic locations around the store. Not that Evelyn used them much. Staying busy kept her mind off the legal proceedings Rebecca had set in motion. The bell above the door chimed. Be right with you, she called, adjusting a final bloom. Hello, Evelyn. The familiar voice froze her in place. Grant stood in the doorway, impeccable in a tailored gray suit that probably cost more than the shop's monthly revenue. His blue eyes, once so charming to her, now held a coldness that matched his perfect smile. You're looking well, he said smoothly, taking a step forward. Though this, he gestured at her work apron and the flowers surrounding her, is hardly what I expected. A flower shop, really. Her thumb brushed against her fingertips, but she forced herself to stand straight. You need to leave. Leave? I've spent 2 months looking for my wife, only to find her playing shopkeeper in some coastal backwater. His voice hardened. Did you think I wouldn't find you? That you could just take what's mine and disappear? The back door creaked. Mason, stepping into the shop, his eyes took in the scene, and his entire body tensed. Sir, he said, his quiet voice carrying an edge of steel. We're closed for inventory. Grant's smile turned razor sharp. Ah, and this must be why you ran here. Tell me, does your new boyfriend know you're carrying my child? Step out of my shop. June's voice cut through the tension. She stood in the doorway to her office, holding her phone. The police are on their way, and I've got security cameras recording everything. The police? Grant laughed softly. I'm merely visiting my wife, my pregnant wife, who abandoned our home, stole sensitive documents, and appears to be having some sort of mental break, working in a flower shop, living above one. It's concerning behavior, don't you think? Evelyn felt a surge of anger cut through her fear. Concerning behavior. Like hiding money in offshore accounts. Like gaslighting your wife for years while sleeping with other women. That kind of concerning behavior. Grant's smile faltered slightly. You always did have an active imagination, dear. But now you're forcing my hand. I filed for emergency custody this morning. A judge will see that you're clearly unstable. A judge will see the evidence. Evelyn touched the USB drive at her neck. Every conversation where you manipulated me, every financial record showing your fraud, every email planning your affairs. Her voice strengthened. I kept it all, Grant, because some part of me always knew who you really were. Police sirens wailed in the distance. Grant's perfect facade cracked for just a moment, showing the rage beneath. This isn't over, he said softly. You have no idea what you're doing. Actually, Mason stepped closer, his presence solid and reassuring. She knows exactly what she's doing, and she's not alone. 2 police cars pulled up outside. Grant straightened his jacket, his mask of civility sliding back into place. We'll continue this discussion through proper channels, then. He turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Evelyn, that drive you're wearing so proudly, copy or no copy, accidents happen to digital files all the time. Something to consider. After the police took statements and left, Evelyn sat in June's kitchen, her hands wrapped around a mug of chamomile tea. She could hear Mason on the phone with Rebecca, updating her about Grant's visit. You stood your ground, June said proudly, setting a plate of ginger cookies beside her. Most people crack when they face their demons. You got stronger. I was terrified, Evelyn admitted, but not like before. This time I was afraid of what he might do, not of what I might lose. She touched her growing bump. He doesn't get to control my story anymore. Mason joined them, his face grave. Rebecca says his custody filing was a bluff. He hasn't actually submitted anything yet, but she's expediting our countersuit, and she wants you to stay somewhere else tonight, just in case. June snorted. She can stay right here. I've got my shotgun, and half the police force gets their flowers from us. Let him try something. That night, unable to sleep, Evelyn wrote in her journal, fear shows you 2 things, what you need to protect and what you're willing to fight for. Today, I learned I'm ready to fight for both. Outside her window, Mason's workshop light burned late into the night as he installed additional security cameras, his quiet determination a shield against the darkness Grant had tried to bring back into her world. Late October brought the first real chill to Fairhope. At 24 weeks pregnant, Evelyn sat in Rebecca Martinez's office, watching her lawyer read through Grant's latest legal filing. Outside the Victorian windows, leaves danced in shades of red and gold. He's getting desperate, Rebecca said, setting down the papers, trying to paint you as an emotionally unstable woman who orchestrated an elaborate theft of company documents. She smiled, shark-like. He clearly doesn't know about the 3 backup copies of that drive we've stored with different law firms. Evelyn shifted in her chair, one hand resting on her growing bump. The baby had been active all morning, as if sensing the tension. What about his latest offer? Full custody to him, generous alimony to you, all charges dropped. Rebecca shook her head. Classic power play. He's trying to buy your silence about the financial fraud. She pulled out another document. But we've got something better. Remember those offshore accounts you found? I had a forensic accountant go through them. Your husband hasn't just been hiding money from you. He's been hiding it from the IRS. A knock at the door interrupted them. Mason stepped in, carrying 2 cups of herbal tea from the cafe downstairs. He'd insisted on driving Evelyn to every legal appointment, waiting patiently in the building's lobby each time. Perfect timing, Rebecca said. I was just about to discuss our next move. The preliminary hearing is set for next week in Boston. Evelyn needs to be there. Mason's hand tightened slightly on the cup he was setting down. Is that safe? With the restraining order in place? Yes, and it's necessary. The judge needs to see that Evelyn isn't hiding or unstable. She's a strong woman protecting herself and her child from an abusive situation. The drive back to Fairhope was quiet, both of them lost in thought. Halfway home, Mason pulled off at a small park overlooking Mobile Bay. The late afternoon sun painted the water in streaks of copper and gold. I don't want you to go, he said finally, staring out at the water. Evelyn turned to look at his profile, strong and worried in the fading light. I have to. I know. He met her eyes. Let me come with you. Mason, not to the courthouse, he clarified, but to Boston. I can stay at the hotel. Be there if you need. Anything. The tips of his ears reddened slightly. Mom agrees. She's already arranged for our cousin to help with deliveries next week. Evelyn felt something warm unfurl in her chest. You've both already discussed this. He shrugged, a small smile playing at his lips. We might have planned for it. Mom says I'm as subtle as a freight train when it comes to caring about someone. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Evelyn's heart thundered in her chest as Mason slowly reached over, his calloused fingers intertwining with hers. I know the timing is complicated, he said softly. With everything you're going through, the baby, the divorce, I'm not asking for anything. I just need you to know that you've got me. Whatever happens in Boston, whatever comes next, I'm here. Tears pricked at Evelyn's eyes. Even with all this mess, With Grant's threats and legal battles and a baby that isn't yours. Especially with all that. His thumb brushed over her knuckles. And because that's who you are. Someone strong enough to walk away from a gilded cage. Brave enough to build a new life. Kind enough to make my mom smile again. How could I not? He trailed off, swallowing hard. Fall in love, she whispered. He nodded, eyes fixed on their joined hands. Fall in love. The baby chose that moment to kick, hard enough that Mason could feel it through their clasped hands. They both laughed, breaking the tension. A perfect timing, Evelyn said, wiping her eyes. Just like her mother, apparently. That evening, after they returned to the flower shop, June took one look at their faces and smiled knowingly. She didn't say anything, just hummed an old love song while making dinner, shooting occasional pleased glances at her son. In her journal that night, Evelyn wrote, "Love isn't always a lightning strike. Sometimes it's as quiet as flowers growing through concrete, as steady as hands that build beautiful things, as brave as hearts that choose to trust again after being broken." She touched the USB drive at her neck, thinking of the battle ahead in Boston. But for the first time, she wasn't afraid. She had something Grant had never given her. People who loved her not for what she could be molded into, but for exactly who she was. Boston in November felt colder than Evelyn remembered. The courthouse loomed before her, its stone facade a stark contrast to the warm wooden walls of the flower shop she now called home. At 28 weeks pregnant, she stood straighter than she had during her entire marriage, wearing a simple but elegant maternity dress that June had helped her choose. "Ready?" Rebecca asked, briefcase in hand. Evelyn touched the USB drive at her neck one last time before tucking it safely away. "Ready." The courtroom was already full when they entered. Grant sat at the opposing table, immaculate in an expensive suit, his lawyer whispering urgently in his ear. He looked up as Evelyn walked in, his practiced smile faltering slightly at her calm demeanor. Judge Eleanor Winters, a stern-faced woman in her 60s, called the hearing to order. Grant's lawyer spoke first, painting a picture of a mentally unstable woman who had fled with company documents, abandoning her loving husband in a fit of paranoid delusion. When Rebecca stood to present their case, she didn't immediately speak. Instead, she played an audio recording, Grant's voice, cold and calculating, threatening Evelyn during his visit to the flower shop. "Your Honor," Rebecca said, "this isn't a case of mental instability. This is about a woman who gathered evidence of her husband's financial fraud and emotional abuse, who protected herself and her unborn child from a man who sees them as property to be controlled." She held up a thick folder. "We have documentation of Mr. McAllister's offshore accounts, his tax evasion schemes, and his systematic emotional abuse." Grant's lawyer jumped up. "These are baseless accusations." "If they're baseless," Rebecca interrupted smoothly, "then your client won't mind us sharing these documents with the IRS and SEC." She turned to Grant. "After all, if there's nothing to hide." Evelyn watched as Grant's perfect facade cracked. His hand went to his watch, adjusting it compulsively, his tell when lying, one she'd documented in her journal countless times. "Your Honor," he said, standing abruptly, "may I request a brief recess to confer with my counsel?" Judge Winters peered at him over her glasses. "Granted. 15 minutes." In the courthouse hallway, Evelyn stood by a window, watching snow begin to fall. She could feel Grant's eyes on her from across the corridor where he argued intensely with his lawyer. "Evelyn." She turned. Grant had approached silently, his face a mask of contrition. "Can we talk?" "Just for a moment." Before she could respond, a quiet voice came from behind her. That would violate the restraining order. Mason stood there, his solid presence a shield between her and Grant. He looked strange in a suit, but his eyes held the same steady strength she'd come to rely on. Grant's fake smile turned cold. "Ah, the gardener. Tell me, does it bother you raising another man's child? Or is playing hero to a damsel in distress worth it?" "The only person playing here is you," Mason replied calmly. "And your time's up." Rebecca appeared with a court officer. "Mr. McAllister, step away from my client. Now." When the hearing resumed, Grant's lawyer requested a brief consultation with the judge and Rebecca. After several tense minutes, Rebecca returned to their table. "He's offering a deal," she whispered. "Full custody to you. No contact. Clean divorce. In exchange, the financial documents stay private." Evelyn looked at Grant, seeing him clearly for the first time, not as the powerful man who had controlled her life, but as someone small, desperate to protect his image. "Add a restraining order," she said firmly. "Permanent." And he admits to the abuse on record. The next hour passed in a blur of signatures and legal terminology. When Judge Winters finally gavelled the hearing to a close, Evelyn felt lighter than she had in years. Outside the courthouse, snow was falling steadily. Mason waited by a taxi, his tie loosened, snowflakes catching in his hair. When Evelyn reached him, he wordlessly pulled her into a gentle embrace. "Let's go home," he murmured into her hair. That night, in her hotel room, Evelyn wrote in her journal, "Sometimes victory doesn't look like you expect. Sometimes it's not about destroying your enemy, but about being strong enough to walk away with your soul intact. Today I won something better than revenge. I won my freedom." Down the hall, she could hear Mason talking quietly on the phone with June, sharing the news of their victory. Tomorrow they would fly back to Fairhope, back to the flower shop, and the simple life she'd built from the ashes of her old one. But tonight, watching the snow fall over Boston, Evelyn finally let herself cry, not from fear or pain, but from the pure relief of knowing she was truly free. Spring came early to Fairhope that year. The garden behind Riley's flower shop burst with new life, daffodils nodding in the breeze, cherry blossoms dusting the paths with pale pink snow. In the workshop, Mason had finally finished his latest project, a handmade cradle, crafted from reclaimed oak, with delicate flowers carved along its edges. Evelyn stood in the nursery they'd created in her apartment, running her fingers over the smooth wood. At 38 weeks pregnant, she felt like a garden about to bloom. The room around her told the story of her transformation, no longer hidden away, but flourishing in the open. June's handmade quilts adorned the cradle, while mason jars filled with fresh flowers dotted every surface. "Just like her mama," June said from the doorway, watching Evelyn adjust a bouquet of baby's breath, finding beauty everywhere. The older woman had become more than a landlady or friend. She was the mother Evelyn had needed, teaching her that strength could be as gentle as flower petals and as sturdy as roots growing deep into Alabama soil. "I never thought I'd have this," Evelyn admitted, touching her belly as the baby kicked. "Not just the baby, but this family, real love." June smiled knowingly. "Speaking of love, my son's wearing a path in the garden pacing, says he needs to ask you something important." Evelyn found Mason by the old oak tree, dressed in his usual work clothes but with an unusual nervousness about him. The evening light caught the silver threads in his hair, and his workshop clothes were freshly changed, a detail that made her smile. "I had a whole speech planned," he said when she approached, "about how you taught me what real courage looks like, how watching you bloom here made me fall in love not just with who you are but with who you helped me become." He took her hands in his. "But standing here now, I just want to ask, will you marry me? Not right away, whenever you're ready. I just know I want to build a life with you, both of you." Tears spilled down Evelyn's cheeks as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." The kiss they shared was witnessed only by the flowers and June, who watched from her kitchen window with satisfied tears in her eyes. 2 weeks later, Evelyn went into labor during the morning flower deliveries. By sunset, Lucy Rose Hartley entered the world with a cry as strong as her mother's spirit. She had Evelyn's honey-colored eyes and dark hair, but more importantly, she had something Evelyn had once feared impossible, a family built on love rather than obligation. Mason was there through it all, his quiet strength never wavering. When he held Lucy for the first time, his green-gray eyes filled with tears. "She's perfect," he whispered, and just like her mother. 1 month after Lucy's birth, on a warm spring evening, Evelyn sat in the garden writing in her journal. The USB drive that had once held her freedom now hung retired on her jewelry stand, a reminder of battles won and strength discovered. Lucy slept peacefully in her cradle nearby, while Mason worked on a new project, a garden arch for their upcoming wedding. The sound of his quiet whistling mixed with the chime of garden bells and June's voice talking to her flowers. These were the sounds of home, Evelyn realized, not the elegant silence of her Boston penthouse, but the living, breathing rhythm of love in bloom. She looked at her last journal entry. "Life, like a garden, doesn't bloom all at once. It grows in seasons, through storms and sunshine, through frost and thaw. Sometimes you have to let go of carefully tended dreams to allow wildflowers to grow in their place." Sometimes the most beautiful gardens spring from the soil of broken things. Today, I am not just surviving, I am flourishing. My daughter will grow up knowing that strength can be soft, that love should lift you up, not cage you in, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is plant new seeds in old soil. Here, in this simple place, surrounded by flowers and family and true love, I've found something Grant could never give me, the freedom to grow into who I was always meant to be. From the workshop, Mason's whistle carried on the evening breeze, an old love song, now filled with new meaning. Evelyn closed her journal and went to join him, leaving the empty pages ready for the next chapter of their story to bloom. 2 years later, the bell above Riley's flower shop chimed in the late afternoon breeze. Through the window, passers-by could see 3 generations of family among the flowers. June arranging a bouquet of spring roses, her silver hair still tied back with a floral scarf. Mason teaching little Lucy how to sprinkle water on the potted plants, her honey-colored eyes bright with concentration. And Evelyn, her belly swollen with their second child, writing up orders at the counter. The shop had grown, much like its inhabitants. A new greenhouse stretched behind the building, Mason's wedding gift to Evelyn, who had discovered a talent for growing rare orchids. The apartment upstairs now housed June, who had insisted the growing family needed her old living space more than she did. Besides, she'd said, someone needs to be close to the shop at night. These flowers don't water themselves. On the wall behind the counter hung 2 frames. The first contained Evelyn's final divorce decree and restraining order, not as a reminder of pain but as a testament to courage. Beside it was a photograph from her wedding to Mason, taken in the garden beneath an arch of climbing roses. In it, Lucy sat perched on June's hip, throwing petals at her parents' first kiss as husband and wife. The old USB drive had found a new purpose too. Evelyn had digitized her journal entries onto it, transforming it from a shield into a legacy, a story to share with her children someday about the power of choosing oneself, about how love should feel like freedom, not chains. That evening, as the family closed up shop together, a young woman stumbled in just before closing. Her eyes were red from crying, her hands shaking as she asked about rental rates for the newly vacant room above the shop, the one Evelyn had first called home. Evelyn and June exchanged knowing looks. June put on a pot of tea while Evelyn pulled out a chair. "Let me tell you a story," Evelyn began, her thumb brushing her fingertips one last time, not from anxiety now, but as a reminder of how far she'd come. It's about a garden that grew from broken ground. Outside, the sunset painted Fairhope in shades of hope, while inside, another heart began its journey toward healing, surrounded by flowers and the family who had learned that love, like the most precious blooms, grows best in freedom. The end. In a moment of deep betrayal and despair, Evelyn chose to start again from scratch, leaving behind a life of luxury and security in Boston to find her true strength in a small flower shop in Fairhope. If you were in her shoes, would you have the courage to abandon everything and start again? Or would you try to repair your marriage to Grant? What's more, do you believe that there are cases where forgiving a betrayal is worth it? Or is it a sign to always take a step back and follow a new path? Your participation in the channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please leave a like to help me out and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on the next stories. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.